Erin, just please state your name and affiliation before we start,
Yeah.
please.
My name is Erin Mette, and I am an attorney and Equal Justice Works Fellow at the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center.
So, Erin, thank you. Could you begin by telling us a little bit about what you mean by water security?
Yeah, so for me, water security means fair and equitable access to safe, clean, affordable drinking water for everyone.
To what extent, so what are some burning issues relevant to water security or insecurity that you see right now in Detroit?
Yeah, I think some of the key issues related to water security in Detroit include water affordability, mainly drinking water rates that residents are charged, water access in terms of shutoffs and continued access to water service, and also water quality, drinking water quality, ensuring that the water that residents get in their taps is safe to drink, is free of contaminations like lead, PFAS, really any contaminant. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, for some people who might not be familiar with the problem of water security, you mentioned a lot of these different issues: affordability, access, contamination, service, equality. Can you just try to sort of talk through how these are all connected, if they even are connected, or how does it all come together for you?
Yeah, I think all of these issues, including access and affordability and drinking water safety and quality, are definitely all interconnected. I believe that drinking water is a human right and necessary for everyone to live a healthy life, to survive, period. And so in order to have full access to safe, affordable, quality drinking water, you can't just tackle one of these issues in isolation. You know, they are often caused by a lot of the same problems. And one of those main problems is aging infrastructure in Michigan, aging water infrastructure. That can contribute to higher water rates, as well as contamination, most commonly lead contamination from lead service lines. So I think in order to address one of those problems, you really have to address all of them. And it gets back to those same root causes.
When you mentioned that for you water is a human right, could you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yeah. So I believe water is a human right in that it's fundamentally necessary for humans to survive. And I think it's just unconscionable that anyone, especially in anywhere in the world, would not have access to drinking water, to something so fundamental. And although there is currently no enforceable legal right to drinking water in the United States, I think when I say human right, I mean that as more of a goal, something that, or a moral imperative, something that we should be aiming to achieve, rather than something that is enforceable in our legal system today.
Mm-hmm. So, sorry, can you tell me a little bit about your work, the work that you're doing at the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center?
Yeah, so at the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, I have what's called an Equal Justice Works Fellowship. I'm sponsored by a law firm called Munger, Tolles & Olson. So I have a 2-year project, funding for a 2-year project, focusing on protecting children in Southeast Michigan, primarily Detroit and Flint, from home-based environmental health hazards. And I conceive of that as drinking water quality, affordability, and other home-based hazards, primarily lead paint on the homes, on the walls of older housing stock in the city, as well as lack of access to clean drinking water from either unaffordable water rates or shutoffs, or contamination from lead or PFAS or other chemicals. So I provide I have sort of what I think of as a three-pronged approach where I provide legal services as well as community outreach and education to address the root causes of this issue.
What does that involve, your community outreach in particular?
Yeah, so I've been working in my fellowship for the past 6 months, and a lot of that, in that time, a lot of that has been focused on community outreach. So I have tried to connect with community organizations that have already been doing this work for a long time. I'm certainly not, this isn't a new idea supporting people in Detroit and Flint who are struggling with water access and water quality issues. So connecting with organizations like the People's Water Board, We the People of Detroit, Flint Rising, all of these organizations that have been responding to the needs of citizens and trying to lift up their voices and raise awareness about these issues in order to fix the problem. So I've been trying to connect with these community organizations and learn more about the legal needs of residents that are facing home-based environmental health hazards, and really make sure that I'm tailoring my services to their needs and not coming in and saying, well, this is what I think I should be doing, but really basing my work off of the needs of residents.
So can you tell us a little bit about what the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center does as a result of this, the legal services and the engagement and the outreach you're providing? Are you working with community organizations to prepare briefs? Are you advising policymakers?
Yeah.
So can you just talk us through a little bit about how this issue of water security blends with what GLELC's work is, and how GLELC sort of affects this situation? Yeah.
So GLELC has sort of a similar three-pronged approach. I like to say we engage in legal services and litigation, community outreach and advocacy, as well as policy advocacy, as you mentioned. And we provide these services to people facing a variety of environmental issues, and beyond just water. We focus on energy issues, food justice here in Detroit, and provide services for urban farmers, as well as our name suggests, protecting the Great Lakes and the water resources that we have here in Michigan. We have been, before I came in for my fellowship, GLELC had already been working on water quality issues for a while. We haven't addressed water affordability quite so much, but we're hoping to shift that in the future. Some of the work we're doing related to water quality includes developing an audit system for drinking water suppliers to make sure that they're in compliance with Michigan's newly revised lead and copper rule. So following the Flint water crisis, Michigan revised its lead and copper rule to strengthen it to protect residents. And that includes lowering the lead action level from 15 parts per million to 12 parts per million, and increasing testing of water systems, so we are developing an audit system to make sure that water systems are complying with this new rule. We also recently filed an amicus brief in the Michigan Court of Claims in support of this new rule, because after it was enacted, it faced legal challenges from DWSD and Great Lakes Water Authority, and we're hoping to defend it to make sure that it stays in place in order to protect Michigan residents.
There's a lot of current policy movement around water. And I also don't know where to begin. There's the House Institute policy recommendations which came out. There's the reorganization of the DEQ. I sort of want your take on all of them. But do you want to take them one by one, or do you want to talk about the overall policy framework and where things are, how things are looking?
Sure. Yeah, there's been a lot of policy changes related to drinking water in Michigan recently, and I think most of it is moving in the right direction, especially in terms of addressing lead hazards with the revised lead and copper rule. I am optimistic about the restructuring of the state government and the MDEQ in particular, and I believe that Governor Whitmer really does want to strengthen protections of drinking water, and that's really the motivating force behind this reorganization. I think where we're still lagging behind is in addressing PFAS chemicals. I think we need to move much more quickly in setting a drinking water standard as well as a cleanup standard to address this emerging threat, especially to groundwater in Michigan. But I'm optimistic that will happen in the near future.
So with PFAS, I'm trying to take these one by one.
Yeah.
PFAS, for instance, the legislature has ensuring that we can't have stronger standards than in the feds, for instance.
Yeah.
And how does that sort of affect the broader understanding of really what's happening with these volatile compounds?
Yeah, I think the federal government is really sort of dragging its feet on addressing PFAS, and I'm hoping that Michigan, as well as other states, will take action on their own to address this issue rather than waiting for the federal government to act. We do need a better understanding of these health impacts. There hasn't been much scientific research about the long-term effects of exposure to these chemicals, and I think that's definitely an area where we can move independently, independent of the federal government. Yeah.
So, do you see your role as a sort of liaison with, the scientific community and the policymakers on the one side, and community organizers on the other, who are amazing at mobilizing local people, but might not necessarily have such a great handle on why is this important, or how is this important, to what extent it's important. So how do you sort of negotiate that role when you are working with community groups like the groups of the People's Water Board, for instance?
Yeah, I do see Great Lakes Environmental Law Center and my fellowship project in particular. I do see us acting as sort of a liaison between the scientific community, policymakers, community members. I think it's not so much a function of community members and organizations not having an understanding of the issue. I think people, they're experiencing it firsthand and certainly have knowledge of these issues. But it's often difficult to get your foot in the door with people who to have access to decision makers, to access people with power to set and enforce these laws and regulations that are meant to protect people. And I think for a lot of people in Detroit and Flint and Southeast Michigan in general, they've historically been excluded from that process. And I'm hoping that that Great Lakes Environmental Law Center can change that and make sure that that there is full equitable involvement in those decisions.
There's a lot of policy attention, local policy attention right now on drainage fees. In fact, just today, I think there was an article in Bridge Magazine on the rain tax, for instance. What is your take on really the overall lay of the land as far as drainage and sewage fees?
Yeah, that's one area where I don't have a ton of expertise, unfortunately. I know our organization has done some work on that issue before I came here and started working, so unfortunately I don't have, I think, a very good answer to give to that issue. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the affordability issue
Yeah.
in general? Do you think there's a difference between assistance and affordability when it comes to accessing water?
Yes, I think there's a fundamental difference between affordability and assistance. There are assistance programs in place for example, DWSD customers, the RAP program, the Water Residential Assistance Program, and that involves some financial support. It doesn't really address the underlying causes of affordability. I see affordability as a much more comprehensive approach to making sure people have access to water. So rather than just providing financial assistance for a limited period of time in the hopes that people will be able to sort of get back on track, pay down past due water bills, and maybe be able to afford their water bill in the short term. Affordability, I think, addresses more of the underlying problem. I envision affordability as income-based water rates. I think that's really necessary for ensuring affordability. So reducing the financial burden that customers face in the first place. So reducing the amount that they're charged so that it's proportional to their income rather than just providing some limited financial assistance.
Could you comment on the water affordability plan that's been circulating for a while in Detroit?
Yeah, I think the water affordability plan that was first proposed in 2005, I believe. So it's been an idea that's been in the works for a long time. I think it's a great start, and I think it's because...
Can I interrupt you on that?
Sure.
So sorry.
Yeah.
So would you be able to tell us a little bit about how it began?
Yeah.
I mean, if you
I think I know. Yeah, I think I can address it a little.
So
bit.
just putting that in terms of a storyline, how did it develop, and all of that.
Right.
Stuff.
Yeah. So I believe the water affordability plan, or the water affordability program, as it's sometimes called, was actually commissioned by the Detroit City Council. And it was written by an expert in utility rates and utility assistance programs named Roger Colton. And it was sort of approved by the Detroit City Council but never implemented. And the basis of the water affordability plan is to, as I was saying before about the difference between affordability and assistance, to reduce the financial burden in the first place that's placed on customers. So to reduce that burden to about 2 to 3% of income, to set water rates at no more than 2 to 3% of a person's income, and as well as some other outreach and education programs, I believe, are in the water affordability plan. I'm not certain of all of the details, but that, I think, certainly needs to be revisited. It was first proposed almost 15 years ago now, which is hard to believe. And I think something like the water affordability plan as it was first proposed will need to be implemented if we ever hope to really comprehensively address water affordability issues in Detroit.
What are the obstacles? What are some of the institutional challenges that we're witnessing right now to prevent a water affordability plan?
Yeah, some of the challenges, at least the supposed legal challenges to it that have been put forth, include the idea that it would be in violation, the water affordability plan would be in violation of what's called the Headley Amendment, which is an amendment to the Michigan Constitution, which prohibits implementing new taxes without voter approval. So some critics of the plan have characterized it as basically a hidden tax rather than a fee for service. And so that implementing the plan would be in violation of this constitutional amendment, and therefore would not be legal to implement. That's just one major legal challenge that has been put forth as a reason for not implementing it.
So what is your take on this argument that it does violate the Hadley Amendment? And so, what's your take on that argument?
Yeah, I think there is a strong argument that it would not be in violation of the Headley Amendment, that it would truly be a fee and not a tax. There's a 3-part test that's used to determine whether or not something is a fee or a tax. And I think that there's certainly a case to be made that this water affordability plan would be able to survive that test and to not be in violation of the Headley Amendment.
Can you go over what those 3 parts are?
Yeah. Hopefully I can remember all of them. It's whether or not it's voluntary, whether it's proportional to the services provided, and I'm not going to be able to remember the 3rd prong of the test. As soon as I'm in front of the camera. I just gave a presentation about it last week too, which is...
what you see as the major obstacles to implementing a water affordability plan in Detroit today?
One of the major obstacles is a supposed legal challenge to the water affordability plan. Some critics have said that it would run afoul of the Headley Amendment, which is an amendment to the Michigan Constitution, which basically prohibits implementing new taxes without voter approval. And some critics of the plan have said that it's basically a tax disguised as a fee, and so therefore it can't be implemented without voter approval.
Can you go over what are some of the parts of the Headley Amendment that this might fall afoul of?
Yeah, so there's a test for determining whether something is in violation of this part of the Headley Amendment. It's a 3-part test, whether the fee or the tax, whatever the charge is whether it serves a regulatory purpose rather than a revenue-raising purpose, whether it's proportional to the services provided, and whether it's voluntary, whether people can choose to get the service or not. And I think there's a strong argument to be made that the water affordability plan would meet this test, that it does serve a regulatory rather than a revenue-raising purpose, that water service is voluntary, and that the affordability plan, the financial support that it provides, is proportionate to water service, so that it is truly a fee and not a tax, and therefore not in violation of the Headley Amendment.
So, did you get a chance to look up the Haas report recently?
I did, yeah. I've glanced through it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you be able to comment about that at all?
I think we're still discussing it as an organization actually, and like our feedback on it.
Cool.
So yeah.
So, Erin, tell us a little bit about what got you interested in water and environmental issues at the policy level.
For my interest in environmental law and water law in particular really grew out of my work as an environmental educator. Prior to law school, I joined AmeriCorps and worked for a few different organizations, teaching environmental science to middle schoolers. And part of that journey led me to the University of Michigan, where I completed a master's project with Beecher High School in Flint. And that project sort of grew out of students' interest in developing a garden at their school. They wanted to address the issue of food access to healthy, fresh food in Flint. And I was really inspired by their commitment to addressing this injustice that they saw in their own community. And it was really great to work with the students and teachers and community there. And after I decided to go to law school, news of kind of both the shutoff crisis and the Flint lead contamination crisis really broke right as I was starting law school. And I immediately thought back to the students and the community that I had worked with in Flint, and knew that I wanted to focus my work on environmental justice and learn the skills necessary to become an effective advocate for people, and especially children, that were facing environmental health hazards like contaminated drinking water.
So the legal side of things is often it's such a vital part of environmental organizing, but not necessarily the most visible or the sexy part per se. Can you talk a little bit about who you partner with, and maybe some ways that you have seen some of the impacts of this work around you?
Yeah, a lot of our work is done in partnership with other organizations, either other legal services organizations, some environmental law organizations, and community groups and nonprofits. Most recently, we partnered with the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is a much larger environmental law organization, environmental law and advocacy organization. They partnered with us in filing this amicus brief in support of the revised lead and copper rule here in Michigan. So I think partnerships like that are really make our work more effective, because we get the access to the resources and expertise of a major organization like NRDC, whereas GLELC, what we bring to the table is really a close-up, on-the-ground understanding of issues like water contamination and how they affect people here in the city of Detroit. We're the only organization providing that kind of environmental legal work right here in Detroit. So to be able to partner with larger organizations, I think, makes us both more effective.
Do you find it difficult when, because a lot of the, when you're filing legal briefs or filing lawsuits, for instance, so much of it requires having a credible witness who's, your plaintiff, pretty much. And given that so many highly vulnerable residents are, I think, understandably a little wary of having the spotlight on them, how does that potentially complicate your work?
Yeah, I think the understandable distrust of the state government and from decision makers, it does make it difficult. We don't want to further exploit communities that have already been, terribly mistreated and exploited by these failings at the policy level. We try to be very genuine in our outreach to community organizations and to residents, and building trust and relationships is really fundamental to the work that we do. We want people to know that we're a part of this community and we're here to advocate for community residents. And, I think it hasn't been a major barrier for us yet, just because we try to be very intentional about how we go about building those relationships.
Can we pause for sound?
Yeah.
Okay.
When you look around you and you see both the vulnerabilities of various populations, as well as the efforts of various organizations like yourself, where do you see this broader movement headed, both locally and perhaps at the federal level? So maybe you could talk about locally first, and then talk about nationally.
Yeah, I think Detroit is really a model for these issues of water access and security. We've been in the news a lot lately, Detroit and Michigan more broadly, for a whole variety of water crises, like in Flint and with water shutoffs in Detroit, and now with PFAS contamination. But I think community members have also been at the forefront of advocating for people that are facing these issues. We are, even though our problems are very visible, I think the leadership that community members have shown is even more noteworthy. Organizations like People's Water Board and We the People of Detroit, they're really doing incredible work to make sure that people's voices are heard, and that these issues are getting national attention, state level attention, but as national attention as well. And I think although we have work to do at the local level in making sure that a water affordability plan is adopted so that water is affordable here for Detroit residents, I think we are leading the way in showing what's possible to other cities that are facing similar issues.
Is there any movement at the national level to address a legal right to water at all?
Unfortunately, there hasn't been much momentum behind creating a legal right to water. Following the Flint water crisis and some of the lawsuits that were brought in response to that, there was some discussion that maybe a constitutional right to water could be found, in our Constitution as a new due process right, essentially. But otherwise, there really hasn't been, at least that I see, a real national push towards making sure that that water is affordable and accessible for everyone, unfortunately.
You mentioned earlier that water is a human right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to repeat that.
Sure, yeah.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier that water is a human right, but we do charge for water.
Mm-hmm.
We do pay fees for water.
Right.
Do you think that we should continue to be charged for water? And if so, is there a fair price that one can levy for water?
I do think that we do need to charge for water. It is a service, it's not free to getting water that is clean and safe to drink from the source to people's homes and businesses and anywhere where people are accessing water. That does cost money. So no, I don't think water should be free necessarily, but there is certainly, we can do a much better job of how we charge people for water rates. And I think an affordable burden needs to take into account household income. And I think making water rates proportional to household income, the EPA has suggested an affordable burden of 2 to 3% of household income, and I think that's a great starting point in discussing what a fair rate is to be charged.
Who do you think the water belongs to?
I think the water belongs to all of us. Here in Michigan, we have the public trust doctrine for the Great Lakes, where the water in the Great Lakes belongs to everyone. It is held in trust by the government for us and for future generations. So, yeah, I think water is for all of us. It belongs to all of us, and it's not owned by any single person or any government.
So, what role do you think that we, as ordinary citizens and residents, can play in managing or protecting our access to clean drinking water?
Yeah, I think residents have an important role in holding our decision makers, our politicians, the legal community accountable. I think we have, within our legal system, citizens do have some avenues for getting involved in setting new standards and making sure those standards are enforced, like public comment on proposed permits and in citizen suits to enforce environmental laws. But beyond that, I think just sharing the stories of residents is incredibly important. It's making sure that government officials, policymakers, decision makers know how these policies and laws affect everyday people. I think that's making sure that those voices are heard is very important.
How would you counter the argument that if we do income-based water billing, that will perhaps mean water bills for a lot of suburban residents will go up exponentially, which will be horrendous to manage politically.
Yeah.
So how would you counter that entire narrative? Why should we pay for Detroit's water?
Right. I don't see the implementation of a water affordability plan or income-based water rates. I really don't envision that would have this awful effect on suburban water customers that's so often touted. Really, if more people are able to pay into the system, even if it's a smaller amount, just 2 to 3% of income, that's more than nothing. We have a lot of residents that can't pay their water bill at all. They get overwhelmed and just get behind on water bills and then have their water bill shut off. That is, that harms water service providers as well. That's money lost for them. And they have to expend money to collect on those past due bills. And if we can make sure that everyone is paying into the system and paying what they can afford, I think that actually will ensure that water rates are more affordable for everyone, not just low-income residents in Detroit. That's, I think, everyone, all customers would benefit from a water affordability plan.
So in closing, I want to ask you to reflect on a story that inspires you. It could be a story that you've heard firsthand, that you've witnessed firsthand, or heard from someone else. It could be about someone who's had to deal with water insecurity, whether in terms of the shutoffs, or whether in terms of something else, Or it could be a story of a water warrior, an organizer whose amazing story of resilience inspires you. What inspires you when you look around you and you think about all these experiences and stories? What inspires you?
Yeah. I am inspired every day by the community groups and residents that we work with. A personal hero of mine is definitely Sylvia Orduña from People's Water Board. And going to the People's Water Board meetings every month and just hearing from a diverse group of Detroiters that are all facing these issues personally and doing all that they can to help their neighbors and to make sure that everyone's voices are being heard about this issue. That's been really energizing and inspiring for me to be a part of an organization like that really welcomes everyone and wants to hear everyone's perspective and tries to work collectively to address these water access issues.
Thank you so much. Are there any other issues that we've not covered already related to water security in Detroit that you think we should discuss?
I don't think so. I think it touched on a lot of different topics. So yeah.
So could you just explain what PFAS is?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do I have to clap again?
No,
No, okay,
I can
yeah.
turn it off.
So PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which are a class of chemicals that are persistent in the environment. They have often been used in manufacturing waterproof clothing, nonstick cookware, and firefighting foam. They've ended up in our groundwater system in a variety of locations throughout Michigan. There are a few Air Force bases where the firefighting foam was used, where that's now migrated into the groundwater. Another example is the Wolverine shoe factory in Rockford, Michigan, where the waterproofing substance on the shoes got into the groundwater and is now in the surface water nearby. So it's not a new contaminant, but our awareness of its impacts and its presence in our environment is really emerging now.